Okay, so now I'm going to start drawing this object. So I need to figure out where I'm going to place it. So I have my measurements written on here, so I can actually use them to help me determine all of this. So the first thing I'm going to do is, remember I have a scale that I chose, 1 to 2. So every 1 inch equals 2 inches on here. So this 5.5 inches normally would measure exactly 5.5 inches. But if I drew this full size, it wouldn't fit on the paper when I drew it. So I'm going to actually cut it in half for sizing. So 5.5, you can use a calculator. I'm actually just going to do it for ease of use. And I'm just going to use the calculator on my phone. So what I can do here is I can take my calculator and do 5.5, so 5.5 divided by 2, and that equals 2.75. So that's 2 3/4. So that means the actual size I'm going to draw this is only 2 3/4 wide. So that's how we're going to get our scale. You can choose any scale you want really, as long as you know how to do it. Again, like I said, if you need to look up how to use scale. Now, what we're going to do here is figure out how big this object's actually going to be. So we have 2 3/4 by, this is 3.5, so if we take 3.5 and divide it by 2, it's 1.5 is half of 3, and 1/4 is half of half. So 1.5 plus 1/4 is 1 3/4. So this shape will actually be 1 3/4 by 2 3/4. So we're going to shrink it quite a bit. Now, I'm going to write that down on another piece of paper so I don't forget. So 1 3/4 by 2 3/4. So I just wrote that on a piece of scrap over here, and then I have it to work with. So that's my front view side. How big is my top going to be? Well, 5.5 and 5.5, that's the same, so that's 2 3/4. But this is 4, right? So that says 4 inches. So I'm going to take 4 divided by 2, and that's 2. So my top is only, there's 2 by 2 3/4. So I'm going to write that down. And then my right hand side, so my side view, it's going to be the same, 4 inches, because that's how big that is. So 4 inches, which is going to go to 2. So it's 2 wide this time. So side view by 2. And then my height. So this is a different measurement we haven't looked at yet. So this is 3.5 inches total height. So 3.5 divided by 2 is 1.75. So 1 3/4. So with those numbers, I can actually figure out my placement for my object. So I'm actually going to only really be worrying about the first part I draw. So I'm going to choose to draw the top first, okay? Just because it's top in the view of the whole project here. So I'm going to see if I can get this wedged up so you can kind of see what I'm working off of this whole time. So I'm going to be putting this onto the top section of my page. So I'm actually going to use that center point I created. So remember, I have an X from corner to corner in each quadrant of this page. And if this is going to actually be 2 3/4 wide, what I can do to make this a little easier is measure from the center half of 2 3/4 in each direction. Now this is complicated, but it will make your drawing look better. So I know that this is only going to be 2 inches tall. So I'm actually going to go 1 inch in each direction to simplify that first. So I'm going to set my height by measuring. I have my 1 on the center mark, and I'm going to mark the 0 and then 2. Okay, so that's how tall my image is going to be for the top view. Width-wise, 2 3/4. Well, what's half of 2 3/4? It's 1 3/8. So 1 3/8 in each direction. So it doesn't matter what inch you use as long as you know how much you're measuring. So 1 1 2 3/8 1 and 1, 2, 3/8. Okay, so now that is how big my top view is going to be. Those little dots I'm making are what's going to give me my accurate measurements. Now I can actually use this triangle. I know you probably don't have one, but you can use it if you actually just lay it on the lines you've drawn on your page to use them as a 90-degree angle. So I'm not going to draw dark lines, I'm going to draw very light lines. And the reason they're very light is because I'm just getting the location, I'm not actually drawing my object yet. So they're very light lines. I don't even think you could probably see those. And you can actually use your triangle off of the lines you drew. But what I'm going to do here is just draw them lightly, even though you can't see them. And what I'm going to get you to do is actually make them dark once you're ready to. So now I have my main dimensions. I can actually go ahead and erase the excess lines that stick off the edges. So I drew my lines longer than I needed. And now I'm going to draw darker lines here because I know that these lines for sure are going to stay on my page. I'm sorry if my arms are blocking a lot of this. So I've got my two sides. Now I draw the top. And I am going to go into detail on another little topic after we're done drawing the basic shapes about invisible lines and other things like that. So invisible lines are going to actually help somebody who wants to build the project do something differently. So there's my top view. I've got the size. I don't have these parts on it yet though. But I know that my top view is a rectangle just with some shapes added to it. So for now, I have a top view. Okay, so I'm going to start laying out all these dovetails that you can kind of see here in the video. So the first line needs to be 3/8 from the edge. Now remember, everything on here is the right measurement. I'm going to divide everything by 2 to get it to the right scale. So 3/8 divided by 2 is 3/16. So I'm going to measure from the edge of my square, or rectangle, 1, 2, 3/16. I'm just going to make a little line. And then this is 1 inch, so I'm going to go 1/2 inch from there. 1/2 inch. And then this is 1/2 inch, I'm going to go 1/4 from there. And this is 1 3/4. So 1 3/4 is going to be, 1/2 3/4 is 3/8, and then 1/2 of 1 is 1/2. But if we turn 1/2 inch into eighths, it's 4/8. So 4/8 plus 3/8 is 7/8. So I'm going to go again from that line and go 7/8 of an inch over. And then I've got another 1/2 inch space, which is only going to be 1/4. And then I have a 1 inch space, which is going to be 1/2 of an inch. And I'm noticing now my drawing's not that accurate because I don't actually have that proper space. So it's nothing to worry about, but that's the reality. Now, I know that the distance from here to here, so the difference in material here, I know that that's 1/2 of an inch. So I'm going to actually measure 1/4 inch up from my edge on each side here. Okay, so now I can actually draw a light line connecting that line that's going to be the top of my dovetails, which is what these are. And now I can draw the vertical lines up to that line. Try and make sure you keep your ruler straight so everything looks nice and crisp. So now I'm actually drawing dark lines vertically, which you can't see yet. They're covered by the ruler still. But you'll see them in a second. So there's my vertical lines. And now I need to actually make the parts that are visible dark. So I'm going to make the parts that would actually be visible. Okay, so there is the 3 points. Now I can go in and erase the extra lines that shouldn't be there. Okay, so those are gone. So there's the dovetails from the top view. This is actually done being drawn. We're going to add dimensions and stuff later, but for now this is really good and very visible. Okay, so the next step we're going to do is we're going to draw the front. So this is our front. We now need to draw this. We're going to transfer that down to the lower part of the page. So the way I'm going to end up doing this is I am going to use that centering technique I did before, just for the vertical placing, because we already know where it goes sideways. So this object is 3.5 inches tall. We already got that converted before, so that's only 1 3/4 high. Half of 1 3/4 is going to be half of 1, which is half. Half of 3/4 is 3/8. So again, 4/8 plus 3/8 is 7/8. So I'm going to go up from the center mark, 7/8, and then down 7/8. Okay, and now this is where I have my top and my bottom. But I can actually transfer from my top drawing now. So if you look, I've lined this up nice and accurately here. And now I can come down here and draw a light line just to transfer it down. And then I'm going to do the same on this side. And pretty much you do this for every line you're going to need in this process. So I'm going to need all of the lines that I actually drew last time. So I'm going to transfer them all down very lightly so I can see them, but not so they're hard to erase. And they're big enough that they're for sure going to be useful to me. So they're for sure going to line up where I need them. So I'm just copying every line on the top drawing down to the bottom drawing. And this is why orthographic drawings are so nice and easy to work with. So I've got my lines. They're not perfectly straight. Hopefully you'll be able to make yours a little more straight. See if you can see those there. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines. They're not perfect, but they're decent. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a triangle to do this. You can eyeball it, but I'm going to use this line as my guide and line up to the dot that I want to draw a line on. So now I'm going to draw across there. And that I can actually make a dark line now, or I could wait and do it later. And I'm going to do the same at the bottom. So I'm actually going to flip my triangle over so that I can use the same line. Again, dark line all the way over. And now I have those two views. So now I can use just my ruler and connect these lines on the sides because we know that they exist. And once I have that, I've got this shape on my lower drawing, the outside of that shape. Okay, so I've got that partially in there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention to how far down this goes. That's only 1/2 inch, which we know translates to 1/4 inch when you divide it by 2. So I'm going to mark 1/4 inch. And over here, 1/4 inch. I'm not actually going to draw a light line all the way across because I have my light lines already. So I know where I'm going to draw. And it's going to be in the large areas in between because I just told you the opposite. It's going to be the little areas in between. So we need to see where those little tails are, okay, all the way across. So we're going to go in here and we're going to line up with our 1/4 inch line. And we're going to draw a line in each of those little spaces. These can be dark lines now, okay, just like that. Okay, so now we have angles to deal with. So if you actually look closely here, those are on angles. So we're going to just connect the lines to get those angles. So all I have to do is using my ruler, I'm actually going to need some other measurements, but I have these lines at the top, which I'm going to leave. and we're going to connect those lines the right way. So I'm erasing all my lines here which are extras, which are all those lines that I drew as guides from the top, which I'm going to leave at the top, but I'm erasing them inside the object. Okay, so now I'm going to use the measurements that are on here and lay them out on this side so I have another marking. So my first one is 1/2 inch, so I'm actually going to measure from the side 1/4 inch. Okay, there's my 1/4 inch. And now what I can actually do is, because I know that's a 1/4 and I know this is actually smaller, I can actually line up with that mark and connect those two lines, just like that. So I'm using these lines that I referenced from up here to connect my line from down here to them to get that angle. So now I know my next space is 7/8 of an inch. So 1/2 of 7/8 is 7/16. So 7/16 is right there. And then that piece is 5/8, which when cut in half is going to be 5/16. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/16. So now I'm actually going to draw that line. Now, this isn't lining up perfectly because I didn't do a great job of transferring my lines. So this is offset from this. So it's actually going to give me a shape more like a straight line on my left hand, angled on my right hand, which isn't what I want. So I can just be careful here and see if my lines are just really far off, and they might be. In this case, I think they are. Yes, they are. So I'm just going to make sure that they're more accurate here. And that looks more accurate now. So now if I combine those lines, now I'm getting closer to that shape. Now this isn't perfect, like I said, but you just want to do your best to make it look nice. So I'm going to make sure I still have that mark fairly accurate up at the top, because my lines seem to be off a little bit here. Okay, now I know these are the same, so it's a 1/4 inch in from the side. Okay, and then I connect that. And then that should also be the same, which is going to be 7/16 of an inch in. Okay, and now I have my parts transferred over. Again, not perfect, but they're fairly in line. So I can actually go ahead and erase all these extra transfer lines that I have up here. When you're done, you're going to erase almost everything on this background except for the top, front, isometric right, and the actual image. So even the centering points, you're actually going to get rid of those. So I'm going to actually get rid of mine right now, the ones that are in my drawing, because they're just in the way. Okay. And now I just have these blank objects. And they're nice and clearly laid out. I have my top and my front view complete. Okay, so now I have my top and my front, and now I need to do my side view, which in this case is the right-hand side. So, because we already set these up, we need to know the distance from here to here, because that's how far we go from here to the next drawing. So, the distance we're just going to measure. So it is 1 7/8. So I'm actually going to measure over 1 7/8, following the same lines. 1 7/8. And at 1 7/8, I'm going to draw a light line just to start my next part of the drawing. So follow the top, 1 7/8, and then draw a line. Okay, so this distance is the same as this distance. Now that actually allows us to do something pretty cool. It doesn't really work great when you're just at home using this, but you're going to see something. If this was on a straight edge, so if I put this at perfect, like parallel to my drawing, and we're allowed to slide this, I could actually take this and I'm going to line it up with this point, and you're going to see that it should intersect perfectly up here. Now, it's probably not perfect because I drew this just by hand, but it's pretty close. So if you look, let me see, the end of this line here and this line up perfectly at 45 degrees. So maybe I'll show you this way. You can actually see that if this is straight with your page, that line there lines up with that line there, which means you can actually transfer these dimensions over here using a 45-degree angle. It's kind of a cool feature of being able to transfer these dimensions over to here. But it's not the end of the world. We're just going to draw it the way we need to. So right now we're drawing this, and I have the height set, right? Because this is this drawing. Now we're flipping it this way to see that side. So what we need is we need to know how wide the bottom is and the top. So the top, we know, because it's the same as on the top, it's 4 inches. So we know that this is going to go 4 inches across, which when we divide by 2 is 2 inches. So get your ruler, measure out 2 inches. So I just made a little mark here to know where that is. I'm going to actually now erase the excess part of my line, so it's gone. And now I have the end of that top line. So my next step is to figure out how far the gap at the bottom is. Now I can connect this top to my bottom because that's a solid side. So right now I have drawn already this and this. So this side and this side. Now I need to draw this foot and this foot. So I know that this is ½ of an inch from here to here. So I'm going to draw 1/4 of an inch over here. Now don't ever forget that you're drawing to scale, because if you forget, something's going to be very weird. Now the distance from here to here I have written, it's 2 1/4. So ½ of 2 1/4 is 1 1/8. So I'm going to measure 1 1/8 from there. Use a part of the ruler I can actually read. 1 1/8. And then I know that the other side is also ½ an inch, which is actually 1/4. So I don't know if you can see this clearly, but I have a mark here and a mark here and here. Now those lines could go all the way up. I'm going to just carefully mark them closer to the top instead to keep them straighter. So I'm going to mark 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to mark 1 1/8, and I'm going to mark 1/4 inch again. So now I can actually go ahead and lightly draw these lines, connecting those dots I just drew. Okay, so these are those legs. I know that top to bottom, this thickness is ½ of an inch as well, so that's also 1/4 inch. So I'm going to mark 1/4 from the top at both ends. Now I drew this line solid because that's the end of the top. Now, try and focus here so you can see. Okay, so as you can see, this piece actually comes right off the edge. So on the other side you can see it better. Comes right off the edge. So we're going to draw it like that. Okay, but this edge, you can see we have a dovetail. So you can see here, there is a dovetail. So we need to draw that as well. So I have the measurements, I'll be able to transfer them, but for now, I'm just going to keep drawing. So let's focus back on the drawing. Now, I'm going to connect lightly this 1/4 inch line, just like that. Okay, so now I have that line transferred over, and I erased my excess. Now, this one I know is done. It just goes right to the edge of the block, it's fully complete. I can actually finish this vertical line so it's permanent. That's good. I can finish these vertical lines up to the top as well because they're also permanent. And I can actually erase this extra bottom line. Okay, now to draw my dovetail, I need those measurements that I said that I had right here. So I know that the bottom of the dovetail goes in 1/16. So from this edge it goes in 1/16. Now in this case that's a very small measurement because 1/16 divided by 2 is 1/32. This ruler does have 30 seconds and it's not going to be a very obvious marking. I'm going to warn you, you might not actually see it because it's so small, but that's what I'm going to use. I know that the height of my dovetail is 1/4 inch, so that means I'm only going to go up 1/8 of an inch. And I'm going to go up on both sides 1/8. Okay, now I can connect my little line that I drew out 1/32 up to my dot. It's very hard without a proper drafting table when it's this small. Okay, now I have the shape of my dovetail. So I'm going to erase the line that's dividing it so it doesn't look like a broken line anymore. And make sure everything is solid. I'm going to finish this top line, make sure it's nice and dark. Alright, now hopefully you can see that. That's as close as I can get. I'm going to finish the top line because I haven't actually gone over it to make it dark yet. And then there's my side view. Okay, so this is my right side, the front, and then the top view. So they should all look same as your object. Okay, now the hidden lines I was talking about is something you're also going to add. So a hidden line shows something that's happening that you can't see. So when we're looking at the top view of this object, we know that there's a leg back here, but you can't see it in your drawing. It just looks like a flat area. So we need to draw that in, and we draw it as a hashed line, so like a dashed line. So we actually have measurements that we can use, so we know that we have the distance from here to here. Right? So if we actually measure a drawing now, if you drew it accurately, you should be able to take measurements from it. So 1 3/8. So we can measure from here 1 3/8 to get the distance back. So I'm going to measure 1 3/8. Make a little mark. I know that it's 1/2 inch thick, so I'm going to make a 1/4 inch mark. And I'm going to do it again on the other side. So 1 3/8 and 1/4 inch. Okay, I made my 2 little marks, and now nice and simple, I line up my ruler, and all you do is just draw a dashed line carefully. Try and keep it somewhat consistent so it looks nice, and there's 1 dashed line. And then I'll draw the other dashed line to show the thickness of the part. Try and make your dashed lines look the same. And there you go. So there's a hidden part. Hopefully you can see that right here. That's our hidden geometry. So that's the only part we're missing, is being able to see that leg on the top view. On the front view, there really is no hidden geometry to see other than that technically there is, on the other side of this piece, the thickness of this. So that one's easy. We actually have the same thing on here that I forgot. You would actually line that ruler up and draw dashed lines as well there. Trying to make sure not to touch the actual lines. So there's a dashed line between there. And then we draw a dashed line here. and then that's showing the hidden geometry on the other side of that line. On this one, there is actually hidden geometry to see, which would be the dovetails that go all the way through to the top. So you actually need to use this line and draw a dashed line there. So that's a dashed line as well, showing that this piece intersects with that piece. Now I'm not too worried if you get your hidden geometry perfect. I'm more worried that you get your orthographic layout more accurate. So this is what your biggest goal is to get an object onto paper accurately, and you should be able to take measurements from it once you scale it to the right size. So I can actually now take this, measure the width, and if I multiply it by 2, my scale, I'll get the actual size in real life. So I could use these drawings to actually go and build the object. Now we're also going to add dimensions to this in another step.